Hello, everyone, and welcome to podcast number 5 in the series from the Activate Group Australia. For this podcast, we've asked Rugby League Hall of Famer Wayne Pearce to come in and talk to us about motivation and coaching, particularly for teams and for leaders. Wayne is with Activate Group Australia Director Jamie Labina. Jamie is also the CEO of Superior Sales Consulting. Over to you, Jamie.
Thank you, Keith. I'm really excited to welcome everyone to this podcast today, which is our podcast on peak performing teams. Today, we're joined by a special guest who's a non-FMCG traditionalist, and would love to recognise the fact that this person has received the Order of Australian Medalist, was an absolute legend in the game of rugby league as a coach, as a player, and as a captain, and has represented his country on no less than 19 occasions. So Wayne Pearce, welcome to our podcast this morning.
Hi, Jamie. It's great to be on board this morning. Thank you.
Excellent, mate, and thank you for joining us. Look, I'm really excited to have a chat with you today about peak performing teams. You work in that space daily within the corporate space as well, and mate, I'd love for you to share with our listeners a little bit about Wayne Pearce and your backstory and what you're doing now.
Yeah, well, I played rugby league, coached rugby league. I have a science degree from New South Wales Uni, studied psychology there many years ago when I left school, and I was a school teacher for a period when I was playing rugby league, because back in those days you had to work a job. And one of the things that I came to appreciate when I was working, I was a school teacher for a couple of years, then I moved to the private sector and sold advertising for the Channel 10 network way back in the 80s. And one of the things I came to appreciate back in those days was the opportunity that existed for businesses if they got their teamwork right, because there were a lot of businesses that I was coming into contact with on a daily basis that were not really optimizing the talent that they had on their payrolls, and that wasn't because of a lack of desire, just there was a lack of knowledge. And I was experiencing this great teamwork in the sporting world, but in the business world, not quite there. So it sowed some seeds for when I left rugby league after a coaching period of 7 years with the Tigers. I started running programs for businesses to help them become the best version of themselves, and that's what I still do nowadays.
Fantastic, mate. And you actually just touched there on, you saw the teamwork in the sporting space. That sort of takes me to really, you pioneered fitness within the modern game, from back in the 80s. And in your 20-odd year career, obviously physical fitness was a big player, but how did you learn, and what did you learn, and how do you apply that to your mental fitness?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that the mental and physical domains of us as human beings is actually totally interwoven. And if you aren't in the right mindset, then the physical fitness is somewhat more difficult to achieve high levels of fitness, and vice versa. If you're not physically fit, then that tends to drag you down mentally. And it's difficult to be in a peak space mentally. So for me, at a young age, and having studied psychology at uni, I got a real sense of the close relationship and interrelationship between the mind and the body. And I mean, people talk about rugby league as a really physical game, and it is. But if you aren't mentally tough, then it's difficult to get up and perform week in, week out in such a physically tough environment.
Yeah, it is. And, actually, a number of our members, Wayne, have teams in excess of the size of 2,000 staff members. And, mate, what are the key fundamentals that you think, to have a peak performing team from the ground level up? What would you see as the top 5, layers to building a performing team?
I mean, it's a really good question, and it's something that I think a lot of people don't quite understand, that there is a real science behind teamwork. It's not just gut feel, and the science is anchored in a foundation of trust. If you don't create and work hard and tirelessly as a leader to create a platform of trust within your business and a culture of trust, then based on trust, I should say, then it's going to be very difficult for you to really get those high levels, elite levels of teamwork. And that that trust is anchored in what Google identified as because they've done the biggest ever study, data-driven study on teamwork, and that was in a body of work that they call Project Aristotle. And what they identified was that psychological safety, which is the ability of people to express themselves authentically and openly without fear of repercussions, which equates to a high trust environment, they found that was the fundamental ingredient of teamwork. And it is, but there are other important factors as well. So the trust is really critical, but then you've got to have clear expectations, and that clarity of expectations needs to be not just in terms of the goals, it needs to be in terms of roles and responsibilities, and it needs to be in terms of behaviors and the way people are expected to act. And a lot of people tie that back to values, yes, but the values are really reflected and seen in terms of behavior. So what behaviors are we expecting people to walk and talk every day? So that's really important. Clarity of expectations, trust, clarity of expectations is really important. Also, to actually have a culture that's anchored heavily, a high teamwork, a high quality teamwork environment is very much anchored in that culture of accountability. People will do what they say they're going to do, but also the really good teams, the elite teams, people are able to have respectful conversations with each other where they keep each other accountable, because sometimes people will get into habits that are not desired, and that's a little difficult. So that clear expectations is a really important factor. And then you've got to energize the team. You've got to create a culture where you're celebrating achievements and you're acknowledging progress. That's absolutely critical to get the dopamine happening and to get people feeling that sense of progress. And then underlying all that is a clear sense of purpose at an individual level and also for the team. Because if people go to work day in, day out, and when they do feel purposeful about their work doesn't seem like work. It is just a calling, and it's highly motivating. So as leaders in your business, are you creating the fertile soil for those nutrients to really grow? And that those five key factors are really critical, and every one of them is critical.
Yeah, they certainly are. I mean, we all hear about culture. We all hear about, values and trust. I actually am going to jump to a question, Wayne, that, with staff returning to work, okay, so on the back of COVID, what were your thoughts on the inertia of staff wanting to work from home versus the office environment and the balance of that? Do you think that's achievable, and how does that tie back to those those five building blocks?
Well, I've been a big advocate for many years to have more flexibility in the workplace, because what that provides, particularly with the younger generation nowadays, that don't just go to work to pick up a pay packet. They go to work to grow and understand that in a rapidly changing world, people need to upskill. And so the younger generation in particular nowadays wants flexibility around their lifestyle. And I'm a big believer that the reason that most businesses didn't allow people to work from home at all was because they didn't trust them. Okay, so which talks to the problem that exists in businesses like that, is if you haven't worked hard to develop that trust, then you're never really going to have the really high quality teamwork that you could possibly have. So in relation to working from home, I'm a big believer that you should have at least 3 days a week in the office, because you need that face-to-face, you need that opportunity for people to connect with each other, to know each other, to problem solve face-to-face. Yeah, sure, you can do a fair bit of that on the Zoom type interactions, but you can't really account for the face-to-face connection that occurs. And the flexibility, a couple of days a week, flexibility working from home, provided people are given outcomes, they're clear around their expectations, and you keep them accountable, then it's a win-win situation. But I think that that's underdone at the moment. There's not enough businesses really have established the psychological safety to move into that space.
Yeah, and I guess that psychological safety again comes back to that trust, and if you fundamentally don't trust your staff, that's pretty much why you want them in the office 5 days a week in theory. So
yeah, well, it is, and I think a lot of businesses are still looking at black and white television with respect to the business world. Because black and white TV, my experience going through the transition from black and white telly to color telly, I remember I think I was a 14-year-old. I saw my first color television in a shopping shop in
You're showing your age here, Wayne. You didn't need to do that.
I am indeed. But I can remember it was just an awesome experience. But before I saw the color television, I was quite happy with the black and white television because I didn't know any different. But after I saw the color telly, now all I wanted to do was to get a color telly. And that's a bit like teamwork in business. If you haven't actually experienced or seen it, you think you're going okay. But if you haven't really put the foundations in place, there's a lot more that can be achieved. And what that impacts on and what has a major positive influence on is the bottom line.
Yeah. And then the other one that I thought was really important that you touched on is celebrating achievements. I think too often we're too busy continually pushing the boundary and what's next, and we don't stop and maybe just sit back and celebrate with our team and acknowledge the hard work that they have done, particularly coming through COVID and the isolation and just being motivated to still get up and perform every day. So just in celebrating, what do you advise is the way to celebrate with your team?
Well, there's many different ways to celebrate, but the important thing to understand around the celebration, why it's important, there's a biochemical reason for it. Because when you celebrate an achievement, you feel a sense of achievement. What happens is your brain sort of creates a substance called dopamine, and you feel energized, you feel positive, you feel good. And that's why it's important to acknowledge achievements. Now, achievements at the individual level, so someone's done something really, really that's worth acknowledging. Make the effort as a team leader in meetings to acknowledge those individuals and tell the stories around those, because that also helps align to a higher performing culture. But in terms of the group celebration, that's really important as well. Whether that's physically doing something to celebrate a big achievement, or whether it's just acknowledgement of the smaller achievements in front of peers on a regular basis as a team. I mean, that's important as well. There's many, many different ways you can celebrate, many different things you can do, and different levels that you can do it at. But the important thing is, are you taking the time out, which, as you pointed, Jamie, taking the time out to acknowledge the progress, because a lot of people get caught in this momentum, this inertia of move forward without necessarily just stopping and pausing to acknowledge the progress on the way.
Yeah, and mate, going to go a bit of a side view, which is to really dive into a bit of the COVID and what we've just all been through in the last 2 years, and most of the listeners may or may not know that you were one of the heads of project in the NRL Rugby League Project Apollo, and I'd love for you to share with the listeners, what you saw and what you did to bring, obviously, rugby league back to the TV, back to sporting grounds, and being rugby league was one of the first, if not the first, sporting codes back on the field after COVID. How did you achieve that, and what team did you have to build around you?
Yeah, so when the rugby league shut down, when COVID first hit, we had 2 rounds of the competition had gone, and after the second round of the competition, we had an emergency meeting. When I say we, I'm one of the directors of the rugby league of the NRL, or the Australian Rugby League Commission, actually. And as a commissioner, I was called into the meeting. We had to shut down the competition because of the risk to the players and the community. And that was costing us in excess of $15 million a week in lost revenue. And that was unsustainable. So Peter Volandis, who was the chair of the commission, or is the chair of the commission, asked me to get together a team to get to see how we get the game up and running as soon as possible in a safe manner. So for me, not knowing about infectious disease, not knowing about COVID, much about COVID, not really understanding decontamination, all those factors, I had to get the right people on board in the team. And there were two critical skills actually that I needed to get on board. I needed to get on board those people who were technically expert in those specific biosecurity fields. And I also needed to get a whole lot of influencers onto the team that could influence the various stakeholders, because we had multiple stakeholders, players, coaches, the officials and referees, we had broadcasters, we had sponsors, we had government, we had all these different stakeholders. Then we had to have people on the team that had strong relationships and were able to influence the respective people. So, I mean, that was the core of getting the team together. And then my role as the team leader was to make sure that the team we actually built trust. We actually were clear on where we were going, on our expectations, roles and responsibilities, exactly what I was talking to you about all the different layers of the pyramid. It was actually an opportunity for me to put what I share with people into practice, and it worked a treat. We actually were the first sporting code in Australia to resume in the middle of the crisis, and people were critical of us. They're taking risks, they're doing this in the process of getting to this particular date, which was May 28 in 2020. But we actually got there, and in fact, we're the first full contact sport in the world to get up and running in the middle of COVID. And it was because we had such great teamwork, and we were really clear on what it was that we wanted to achieve, and everybody played their role to almost to perfection. Really, it was phenomenal. There were lots of setbacks and hiccups along the way, as there is in a rapidly changing world, because we operate in a world that's massively shifting. So there were lots of setbacks, but we overcome each setback, and we're always working to that restart date that we set, and we ended up getting there. So it was a pretty good achievement.
So is that one of the guidances or advices that you would give to CEOs and leaders and team leaders within business, that by having a goal allows everyone to stay very focused, very clear? I was going to ask you what what was the biggest challenge that you found getting the game back on the field through that period. What was the biggest challenge that you guys faced?
The biggest challenge was really ensuring that the stakeholder groups were being communicated with, because there was multiple on a daily basis. I mean, that was operationally the biggest challenge. Yep. The other big challenge was in relation to convincing the public health officials that our plans were safe for the community, because there was a whole lot of hysteria out there that was being banded around, and we had to cut through the hysteria and deal with the facts. And that's we were very fortunate to have secured the services of a professor by the name of David Heslop, who was also the advisor on COVID to the Army, and he was brilliant in terms of his ability to give us the facts and cut through the white noise. And there was massive white noise out there that was being banded around. You also made a point there about goals being important. This is absolutely critical, not just in terms of teamwork, but in terms of our personal achievements in life, because the power of intention was absolutely critical for us, and it's really important for anyone that's leading teams, that the intention needs to be clear, and that intention actually fuels a powerful process in the brain that involves a thing called the reticular activating system, which I won't go into details because it takes
a whole other session
to talk about that. But Yeah, exactly. But the reticular activating system is a mechanism in the brain that if we can utilize that to embed where we want to get to, our non-conscious brain is going to notice a whole lot of opportunities that we wouldn't have previously identified to actually allow us to get there. It's not some esoteric or spiritual sort of thing. It's actually just the science of how the brain works. So goal setting and setting the intentions and sharing those intentions is really important.
Yeah, it is, mate. And that actually is a great lead into coming into the back of our podcast today, that, you know, we've spoken about peak performing teams. You've given us an idea of some of the examples and building blocks that you've used, and you obviously coach and train businesses on with the Wayne Pearce Academy. But mate, how do we translate peak performance for the individual? So outside of that business scope, yeah, how do we as individuals create peak performance for ourselves, our families, moving forward?
I mean, what you're talking about is something that for me, I'm really passionate about, because I think a lot of things that we need to achieve and become a peak performer, we don't get taught at school. We just get taught the fundamentals that get us out into the workplace and get us progressing in life. And some people stumble on some of the secrets, others don't. But from my perspective, you know, I've sort of dedicated my life to unraveling the science behind peak performance. And one of the key things is that, firstly, understand yourself better than what you do when you leave school. So continue to understand what makes you tick. What is it that fuels the fire in your belly? And when you actually understand what fuels the fire in the belly and what motivates you, and this is heavily anchored in the different personality dimensions and personality types that exist around, that then opens up a whole lot of opportunities. Because a lot of people, if you're not going to work each and every day, and your people in your teams are not going to work each and every day, then they're not in the ideal state of being. The ideal state for every one of us is to really enjoy life and to be prosperous. But so many of us are not in that space because we don't fully understand what the core motivators for us are. What are our psychological, or our personality-based psychological needs? What is it that is our core purpose? And if you aren't aligning with what it is that you intrinsically seek to do and what fuels the fire in your belly, then it's very difficult to enjoy life to the full. So as leaders, it's really part of our role as a leader is to help our people become their best, to help them find what it is that fuels the fire in the belly. And this brings us to another topic, but I won't go there. You know, the difference between the management skills of just getting stuff done and the leadership skills of helping people become their best. They're two different sets of skills that a good boss will understand and grasp and be able to shift between the two. But I think there's a lot we can do to help our staff, our people. Yeah,
and mate, that actually it's pretty pertinent that you've touched on that about the leaders. And what's the starting point for a team leader and managers when they're developing and building a team? What's the starting point, do you feel?
If you want to get in and really strengthen the trust, which is the foundation, you've got to create opportunities for people to actually understand each other better. They've got to, and it's difficult for some business leaders to do this because there's this wall that's put up, that's a safety mechanism between them and their staff, or between staff and each other. So it's really important to actually create an environment. And I know how difficult it is because I run lots of workshops for companies to help them overcome this impasse. But once people crack the shell and start to share a little bit more about themselves, then you have this emotional connection between people, which we call in sport bonding. When people bond, then that emotional connection becomes very strong, and that's the gateway to really high levels of trust.
It is, isn't it? Like it's we start with a brick wall here, and in relationships, and each time we build trust, those layers come out of that brick wall. Well, Wayne, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. I really do appreciate your time. You aren't in the traditional FMCG world that we all work in and live in every day, but maybe this might be an opportunity for businesses out there to have a look at peak performance coming out of COVID. And mate, I'm going to finish off with a quick 60 seconds with Junior. Mate, I'll ask you a few quick ones and throw us your first thoughts that come out. So what would you say was one of the proudest moments of your life?
Oh, without a doubt, playing for Australia for the first time over in England on a kangaroo tour. I mean, hearing the national anthem being played, representing a country, I had tears coming down my cheeks. But that was definitely one of the proudest moments. And
mate, what's probably one of the most challenging times or moments that you can share with the listeners?
It was definitely most challenging time in my life was my dad died suddenly when I was 14 years of age. He had a heart attack, and I was there with 3 boys, and I went off the rails for a period of time. Then that was definitely one of the most challenging.
You certainly turned that around. And mate, favorite TV show or movie? Favorite movie?
Favorite movie? Actually, I just see there's going to be a sequel coming up. Top Gun. I just love Top Gun. Yeah. So I see there's a Top Gun 2 coming out, so I can't wait to see that.
Yeah. So you're a Tom Cruise fan, and mate, finally, who was the hardest player that you had to strap on the boots against?
Probably the toughest player I played against, and toughness is the ability for me. I believe toughness is the ability to cop a whack, get up again, and keep going. And I think it was Les Davidson, the guy I played for South Sydney front row.
South Sydney.
Yeah, he was pretty tough, and I played with him as well in a couple of Origin matches, and he was very tough. I mean, I played alongside a whole lot of tough guys, from Steve Roach, Benny Elias, Paul Cyrano, a whole lot of them. But if you had to pick one, I'd say Les Davidson.
Well, mate, again, thank you for your time this morning. It's been great to catch up. Look forward to sharing this with the listeners. And over to you, Keith.
Thanks, Jane.
Wayne, thank you. I think that's really, really interesting. I'm very, very keen on the mentoring processes, and a lot of the stuff that you said, of course, touches into that particular area. And you're absolutely right. If you can build trust with people, the communication is just so much better.
Yeah, no, it is.
At that particular point.
I mean, it is, but unfortunately, a lot of people in that full-on management mode where we pay you, so you just got to do what you do, and I'm not going to work to build the trust, because it's a process that you have to work at, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
So anyhow,
in the one of the things I noticed in the changing leadership roles is the emergence of some skilled women into senior roles, but certainly a much larger number of women coming into that area. Have you seen any specific dynamic changes with that movement?
Yeah, no, I certainly think so. And I think one of the reasons is because of this trust piece. I think a lot of women are more open to having conversations that they don't have to be seen to be big and tough and strong, where they can have the more sensitive conversations that allow people to take their masks off. Because one of the big problems in relation to what my experience is, having run seminars now for the past 20 years with companies, is that people, you've got to create an environment where people feel safe to actually dip their toe in the water and have a conversation around something that is a bit sensitive and a bit personal. And I think women tend to be able to dip their toe deeper in the water than a lot of guys do, particularly if we grew up and were mentored by not the type of boss you are, but by a type of boss that was this hard line, this is the way we do type things, which is the old school, which is they're the people that model themselves on that type of boss. They're increasingly going to struggle, in my opinion. Yeah. Yeah, so it's
All
very
right.
interesting. We'll keep up the good work, Keith. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate that. Keep up the
Thanks,
great work.
Wayne.
Mate.
Really
Tyler's
great.
there in the background too. Good on you, Tyler.
Yeah.
Thank you too, mate.
Good
I'll
time.
see you later.
Very, very interested to hear the comments from Wayne about how teams and leadership is going in the future and things that he learned along the way, particularly that issue of trust. Very, very important for everybody to understand those things. For our next podcast, we're going to be talking with Clementine Churchill on sustainability. Clementine will be bringing in some representatives of different parts of the industry to tell us about the issues that they face. So we look forward to seeing you in podcast number 6.